Jonnicom.
I've spent the last few years adjusting all of my video game consoles to suit the way that I like to play, whether that be playing my home console games portably or playing my portable games on the big screen. For some people, that seems completely pointless. You could emulate or just play the game on whatever it comes on. But to me, I like to have options, and some of these games that are on smaller consoles can sometimes play better with a nice controller on a big screen. And a lot of these games also get re-releases on modern consoles that make this almost pointless, but still, there's something to be said for playing the game on original hardware, or at least as close as you can get to it. For those of you who've seen my last video, you probably know that I have a PS Placeable, a consoleized version of the PSP, and I absolutely love it. It plays great with my RetroTink 4K, and I've been wanting to do something like that for Game Boy for a long time. While we have options like the Super Game Boy, the Super Game Boy 2, the Game Boy Player, all options that upgrade things like the Super Nintendo or GameCube to play your Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games, I still found myself intrigued when I saw the Game Boy Consolizer by Intech. The thing that's really cool about this kit is that it requires no soldering at all. All you need to do is take apart your Game Boy Advance, drop in a new board or two, and sew it back up. And while I do personally really enjoy this little kit, it's not for everyone, and I wanted to talk about why. So let's get started. So I'm not going to go into a full build process on this. If you want that, you can go check out Macho Nacho, once again a channel that I've shouted out before and really admire. But what I do want to do is dive into it, check it out, and let you know what I think about it. Because I do think that this is a really good way for somebody who doesn't want to do any soldering to play their Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games on a big screen TV. Whether it be AV or HDMI, you have an option here, and it's really simple and quick to put this thing together, so let's talk about it. The kit that I got was actually a blue and translucent black shell. Now, I went ahead and painted mine black because I like everything to be black. But just know that if you're looking for that, you're not going to find it without painting it. You'll only find blue or orange. Putting it together was really simple. All I had to do was take apart an old Game Boy Advance that had a broken screen, drop in the board to this new shell, and sew it back up. It uses pogo pins, so there's no soldering at all. All you have to do is pretty much take it apart and put it back together using the instructions. It's really simple. A caveman could do it. The kit also comes with another board that can turn your old Game Boy Advance shell into a controller, but I don't recommend using this thing. From what I've read, not just from others in Macho Nacho, but also my own experience, while the buttons and everything on the face work, the L and R buttons are pretty terrible. Now, on mine, the L button is actually pretty serviceable. It works well. It's just really, really clicky. But the R button is super shallow. It doesn't click all the way across, and it just doesn't feel good. In fact, both of the triggers just feel a little too loud and clicky for my taste, and while that won't be a huge issue for Game Boy or Game Boy Color games, if you're playing Game Boy Advance games, it's gonna immediately cause some problems. Fortunately, you don't have to use this kit. You can use any Super Nintendo controller as long as it has its little port. So I was able to use my SN30, but you can also use an original Super Famicom or Super Nintendo controller to play these games. One thing that I haven't figured out yet, and I'm not sure if it has this ability, but I don't think it does, I would really appreciate if I could swap buttons. With the Super Nintendo controller layout, A and B are going to function as A and B, but X and Y seemingly have no function, and I'm the kind of person that likes to usually set my A button to the Y button on a Super Nintendo controller, just so that if I'm playing a game like Mega Man or something, I can shoot with Y and jump with B. It's really simple that way for me. Still, it works flawlessly, and as far as I can tell, no input lag at all. The GBA Consolizer does have two forms of video output, as well as two options for aspect ratio. You can do AV out, which a cable is provided to modify it into one of these little tiny input jacks. And it looks fine, but if you're playing this on an old CRT TV like I tried, it's not going to look great. I mean, the CRT does do a lot for these games to smooth them out and make them look nice, but unfortunately, a lot of the Game Boy Advance games, in fact, all of them, are made to run in this really weird, I believe, 3:2 aspect ratio. So they're just going to look squished and messed up, regardless of what you do. However, with the HDMI output, you do get a pretty good video signal. It's nothing special. I mean, after all, you're essentially just shooting out the video signal from the Game Boy Advance directly to HDMI, and it's serviceable. I think anybody who's looking for a quick and dirty option to just play these games on a big screen is not going to have a problem with the colors looking a little bit off and the image being really soft. I mean, me personally, I bought this thing thinking that I could use it with my RetroTink 4K, and honestly, I think I prefer this look compared to the Game Boy Player even with the GBI interface installed. GBI gives me a pixel-perfect and sharp look, but I really appreciate how close I can get to the colors, and honestly, I like the kind of smooth, washed-out, soft color and look that I get for the pixels when I'm using the Game Boy Advance Consolizer. Plus, it's just convenient. I don't have to go through the GBI interface. I can just turn this thing on. But it's really about preference. Do you want that kind of softer, smoothed out look like you would get on a CRT, or do you want that pixel-perfect look? So while I don't think that the Game Boy Advance Consolizer is for everybody, I do think that I have some use cases for it. Right now, I'm just running it directly into my spare TV in the office so that if I want to play Game Boy or Game Boy Advance games, I can. Messing with the switch on the back to go from 4:3 or 16:9 is nice, and while I've seen some reports that either one you pick is going to give you either a stretched out or squished image, on my TV it looks fine. Now, I'm not sure if this is because I have different settings on my TV that allow me to change the aspect ratio, but I had it set to normal and the 16:9 looked perfect on my TV with no adjustment at all. Strangely, I did have to adjust it when I plugged it into the RetroTink 4K, but fortunately, since you can stretch and span that however you want, you can very quickly get a correct Game Boy Advanced aspect ratio. While this thing does look great on the RetroTink 4K with Game Boy Advance games, it doesn't look great with Game Boy or Game Boy Color, so keep that in mind. I don't think there's really anything that will save this for Game Boy or Game Boy Color, but for Game Boy Advanced on a large TV or even running through the RetroTink 4K and upscaling, I do think this is a pretty good option. Now, I did get this on sale. I only paid $60 for this kit. I already had the Game Boy laying around, so, overall, for the price of a new game, or really less than a new game, thanks Nintendo, you can get basically a consoleized Game Boy Advance, and while it's not perfect, it is pretty darn good. If you don't like soldering, I'd say that this is the perfect option. It's really easy to build, and it'd be pretty hard to mess up. But if you're looking for that pixel-perfect look, you definitely don't want to go with this thing. Even with the RetroTink 4K, I could not figure out any settings to make it look as good as GBI did when it comes to pixel perfection and that square look. But that's not always what you want. As I said, I actually prefer the softer outlines compared to the boxy pixel look in a lot of these games. So it's really all preference. Anyway, I'll let you form your own opinions on if you think this is for you or not, but overall, I don't think you could go wrong with buying this thing and trying it out at the very least. Especially if you just want to play your games on a big screen and don't care about how it looks. It's a great option, it's super easy, and it's reversible. That's all for this quick episode of Jonnicom. Thanks for watching.